The dusty pickup truck rattled to a stop at the edge of the withered cornfield. James Harper stared at the foreclosure notice in his trembling hands, the paper wrinkled from being folded and unfolded countless times. A sleek black Tesla slowed on the road nearby, its driver watching with curious eyes. She made a decision in that moment that would transform this failing farm into a technological wonder, but James had no idea his entire world was about to change forever. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The relentless summer heat bore down on Oak Ridge Valley, shimmering above the parched soil of James Harper's farm. At 45, James's weathered face told a story of struggle and perseverance, deep lines etched around eyes that had witnessed too many failed harvests. His once robust frame had grown leaner over the years, shoulders slightly hunched from countless hours of physical labor and the invisible weight of mounting debt. The farm had been in the Harper family for 3 generations, passed down from his grandfather to his father, and finally to James. What had once been a thriving operation of over 200 acres was now reduced to barely 50, the rest sold off piece by piece as agricultural prices plummeted and corporate farms expanded their reach. The drought this year, the 3rd consecutive one, had been particularly brutal, turning what should have been vibrant fields of corn and soybeans into withered expanses of brittle stalks and cracked earth. James wiped sweat from his brow as he examined the irrigation system he'd been trying to repair since dawn. The ancient equipment wheezed and protested, much like his ancient tractor and the rest of his outdated machinery. Each season brought more breakdowns, more carts that needed replacing with money he didn't have. The local bank had already extended his credit as far as they were willing, and the foreclosure notice that arrived last week gave him just 30 more days before they would take action. "Damn it all," he muttered, tossing his wrench into the toolbox with more force than necessary. The metallic clang echoed across the empty fields. His dog, Rusty, a loyal golden retriever mix with patches of gray around his muzzle, looked up from where he lay in the meager shade of a withered oak tree, but didn't move. Even Rusty seemed defeated by the heat and helplessness. James took a long drink from his water bottle, lukewarm now after sitting in the sun. He squinted at the horizon, where heat waves distorted the view of the distant mountains. This land had been his whole life. He knew every acre, every rise and dip, every spot where the soil changed texture. This connection to the land was what had kept him going long after logic said to quit. The logic was becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a rare occurrence out here where reception was spotty at best. It was probably Beth, his sister who lived in Chicago, calling to check in. She'd been urging him for years to sell what remained of the farm and move to the city where he could find steady work. "There's no shame in knowing when to walk away," she always said. But to James, there was. Walking away meant failing his father and grandfather, failing himself, failing the legacy he was supposed to pass down to his own children, children he'd never had because his wife, Caroline, had left 8 years ago, tired of the endless struggle and isolation. Before he could check the call, a cloud of dust appeared on the distant road that cut through his property. It wasn't often that vehicles passed this way, especially not midweek when the nearest town of Millfield was 20 miles away. Most people used the newer highway that bypassed these backroads entirely. James watched as the dust cloud grew closer, revealing a sleek black vehicle that seemed entirely out of place in these rural surroundings. It wasn't a pickup or a delivery truck the usual visitors to these parts, but something low to the ground and expensive looking. As it approached, he could see it was a Tesla Model S, its obsidian surface gleaming despite the dust of the country road. The vehicle slowed as it neared the turn that would take it deeper into the farmland, then stopped completely. After a moment, the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, James could tell she wasn't from around here. Her posture, her clothing, the way she surveyed her surroundings, everything about her screamed city dweller. Curiosity piqued, James called Rusty to his side and began walking toward the road. The woman was studying her phone with a frown, occasionally looking up to glance around as if trying to reconcile what she saw with what her device was telling her. "Need some help?" James called out as he approached, keeping his tone friendly despite his foul mood. Rural hospitality was ingrained in him, regardless of his personal troubles. The woman looked up, startled. She was perhaps in her late 30s, with rich brown skin and dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her attire, crisp white button-down shirt and tailored black pants, looked more appropriate for a boardroom than a dusty backroad in farm country. Large sunglasses obscured her eyes, but he could sense her relief at seeing another person. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. "I think I'm lost. My GPS keeps recalculating, and I haven't had cell service for the last 20 minutes. James nodded, understanding the problem. "Yeah, reception's pretty spotty out here. Where are you trying to get to?" "Millfield," she replied, removing her sunglasses to reveal intelligent dark eyes. "I was supposed to take a shortcut from the highway, but I think I missed a turn somewhere." "You're headed in the right direction," James assured her, pointing down the road. "But this isn't exactly a shortcut. The highway would have been faster. Millfield's about 20 miles that way. You'll hit a fork in about 5 miles. Take the right branch, not the left. Left'll take you to old Jenkins' abandoned quarry, and that road to Dens." End quote. The woman smiled, revealing straight white teeth that suggested expensive dental work. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She glanced past him at the expanse of the farm. "Is this all yours?" James felt a twinge of both pride and shame. Pride in what the farm had once been, shame in what it had become. "Yeah, what's left of it. Harper family farm, going on 3 generations." Her eyes scanned the property with an interest that seemed more than casual. "It's beautiful land," she said, though James couldn't imagine what beauty she saw in the drought-stricken fields. "Used to be," he replied with a shrug. "Drought's been hard on us the last few years." She nodded thoughtfully, then extended her hand. "I'm Maya, by the way, Maya Patel." James wiped his palm on his jeans before shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, her hand soft compared to his calloused one. "James Harper." "It's nice to meet you, James," she said, her gaze still wandering over the farm. "Do you mind if I ask how much land you have here?" It was an odd question from a lost traveler, but James answered anyway. "About 50 acres now. Used to be over 200, but hard times, you know." Maya nodded again, then seemed to catch herself. "I'm sorry, I don't need to pry. I'm just interested in rural properties." James raised an eyebrow. "You looking to buy farmland? Don't waste your money. Corporate farms are squeezing out folks like me all over the country. Unless you've got millions to invest in the latest equipment and can afford to weather a few bad seasons, you're better off putting your money elsewhere." A small smile played at the corners of Maya's mouth. "I'll keep that in mind." She looked at her watch, an elegant timepiece that probably cost more than what James made in a year. "I should get going if I want to make my meeting in Millfield. Thank you again for the directions." "No problem," James replied, stepping back as she returned to her car. "Drive safe. Watch out for potholes on that road. County hasn't filled them in years." Maya slid her sunglasses back on and nodded. "I will. It was nice meeting you, James Harper." As she drove away, leaving a trail of dust in her wake, James couldn't shake the feeling that there had been something unusual about the encounter. People rarely ventured down these roads by accident, especially not well-dressed city women in expensive cars. But he had more pressing concerns than a lost traveler, so he pushed the thought aside and returned to his broken irrigation system. Unknown to James, the brief interaction he'd just had would prove to be the most consequential of his life. Maya Patel was not, as James had assumed, merely a lost city dweller. She was the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world. Her company specialized in cutting-edge renewable energy solutions and advanced agricultural technology, and over the past decade had grown from a small startup in her garage to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with offices in 12 countries. Despite her success, or perhaps because of it, Maya had grown increasingly dissatisfied with the frenetic pace and superficiality of Silicon Valley. The constant networking, the endless competition, the exorbitant cost of living, and the homogeneous thinking had begun to feel suffocating. 6 months ago, she had shocked her board of directors by announcing her intention to relocate the company's headquarters away from the Bay Area. "We need fresh perspectives," she had told them during a tense board meeting. "We need to reconnect with the real world, with the people whose lives we claim our technology improves. And frankly, we need lower operating costs if we want to remain competitive in the long term." Her announcement had triggered weeks of heated debates and resistance, but Maya had stood firm. As the majority shareholder and the visionary behind the company's success, she ultimately had the final say. The board had reluctantly agreed to explore potential locations, with several members still hoping she would eventually settle for another tech hub like Austin or Seattle. But Maya had different ideas. She had been researching smaller cities and rural areas across the country, places with lower costs of living, untapped talent pools, and communities that could truly benefit from the economic boost her company would bring. Millfield had caught her attention because of its struggling economy, its proximity to several universities, and its location in an agricultural region that aligned with her company's increasing focus on agritech solutions. Her visit today was supposed to be incognito, a personal reconnaissance, before bringing in her team of location scouts and analysts. The meeting in Millfield was with the mayor and a few local officials who had been sworn to secrecy. No one was supposed to know that the CEO of Nexus Innovations was considering their modest town for what would be a transformative investment. As Maya drove away from James Harper's farm, her mind was racing with possibilities she hadn't considered before. The struggling farm she'd just seen represented exactly the kind of real-world problem her company aimed to solve. Rural communities being left behind by technological progress, family farms being squeezed out by industrial agriculture, the devastating impact of climate change on traditional farming methods. These were challenges her company's innovations were designed to address. And James Harper, with his weary eyes and calloused hands, put a human face on those abstract problems. She'd seen the foreclosure notice partially sticking out of his back pocket, the broken-down equipment, the dried-up fields. She'd also seen the pride and connection to the land that kept him fighting against overwhelming odds. By the time Maya reached the outskirts of Millfield, she had made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both her company and James Harper's life. Though he remained completely unaware as he continued his futile battle with the irrigation system under the unforgiving afternoon sun. The meeting with Millfield's officials went better than Maya had anticipated. Mayor Robert Williams, a man in his 60s with a booming voice and firm handshake, had clearly done his homework on Nexus's innovations and understood the potential windfall for his struggling town. "Ms. Patel, I cannot overstate how transformative your company's presence would be for our community," he said, as they sat in his modest office in the town hall. "Millfield has been losing population for the past 2 decades as young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. Our main employer, the furniture factory, closed down 8 years ago, and we've been struggling ever since." The economic development director, a sharp woman named Linda Chen, presented detailed information about available properties, tax incentives, and the local workforce. "We have a community college that could develop specialized training programs based on your needs," she explained. "And while we may not have the highly specialized tech talent pool of Silicon Valley, we have plenty of intelligent, hardworking people who are eager to learn and would be incredibly loyal employees." Maya listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes, but her mind kept drifting back to the Harper farm and its owner. When the meeting concluded, instead of heading straight back to her hotel in the nearest city as planned, she asked a question that surprised her hosts. "What can you tell me about the farmland about 20 miles west of town? Specifically, a property owned by someone named Harper?" Mayor Williams exchanged glances with Linda before responding. "James Harper's place? It's been in his family for generations, though like most of our small farms, it's struggling to survive. Good man, James. Stubborn as they come, but salt of the earth. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Maya replied casually. "I passed by it on my way here. It seems like a substantial property with good road access." "It used to be bigger," Linda chimed in. "James has had to sell off parcels over the years to stay afloat. Word around town is that the bank's about to foreclose on what's left. It's a shame." "Really?" His father, Old Henry Harper was one of the most successful farmers in the county back in his day. Maya nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to get some additional information about that property, if possible. Soil quality reports, water rights, zoning restrictions, anything you have. The mayor's bushy eyebrows shot up. Are you considering the Harper farm for your facility? We have several pre-zoned industrial sites much closer to town that would be more suitable. I'm exploring all options, Maya said diplomatically. The rural setting has certain advantages for some of the research divisions we're planning to expand. Linda made a note in her portfolio. I'll compile whatever information we have and send it to you by tomorrow. The county assessor's office should have most of what you're looking for. As Maya left the town hall and walked to her car, the seed of an idea that had begun to form during her encounter with James Harper was taking root. By the time she reached her hotel that evening, it had blossomed into a bold, unconventional plan that could either be brilliant or disastrous. She spent hours on her laptop, researching property records, agricultural data, and local regulations. She made calls to her chief strategy officer and her lead counsel, both of whom expressed serious reservations about her emerging plan. Maya, we've spent months analyzing optimal locations, her CSO, Derek Wong, argued. A failing farm in the middle of nowhere wasn't even on our long list, let alone the short list. We need reliable infrastructure, access to talent, which we can build and attract, Maya interrupted. Derek, think about it. Instead of moving into a pre-existing tech hub or industrial park, we have the opportunity to create something truly revolutionary from the ground up. A headquarters that isn't just an office building but a working laboratory for our agricultural technology. A place where our engineers and developers can directly test and refine their innovations in real-world conditions." End quote. The logistics would be a nightmare, her counsel, Sarah Goldstein, pointed out. Zoning changes, environmental impact studies, infrastructure development, we'd be looking at years before we could even break ground. Not necessarily, Maya countered. The mayor and economic development director are practically desperate for investment in their region. They'll expedite everything they can. And we'd be bringing hundreds of jobs to a community that desperately needs them. The goodwill alone would be worth millions in positive PR. End quote. The debate continued late into the night, but Maya's enthusiasm only grew. This wasn't just about finding a new headquarters location anymore. It was about embodying the very mission that had driven her to found Nexus Innovations in the first place, using technology to solve real-world problems and improve lives. What better way to demonstrate that commitment than by revitalizing a failing farm and helping a struggling rural community in the process? By dawn, she had outlined a preliminary proposal that she knew would shock her board of directors, but might just revolutionize her company. As the first light of day crept into her hotel room, Maya finally allowed herself a few hours of sleep, her mind still buzzing with possibilities. Meanwhile, unaware of the plans being made that would determine his future, James Harper woke in his farmhouse to face another day of increasingly futile labor, the foreclosure notice casting a shadow over every task, every decision, every moment. The following morning, James rose before the sun, as was his habit. Sleep had been fitful at best, his mind churning with calculations and possibilities, none of which seemed to offer a path out of his current predicament. The foreclosure notice sat on his kitchen table, a constant reminder of his failure. His kitchen was like the rest of the farmhouse, functional, but outdated, with appliances from the early 2000s AIM, countertops that had seen decades of use. The coffee maker gurgled as it brewed the strong black coffee that fueled James's long days. Through the window above the sink, he could see the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern sky. Rusty pattered into the kitchen, nails clicking on the linoleum floor. The dog nudged James's hand with his nose, a morning ritual seeking affection and breakfast, not necessarily in that order. "Morning, old boy," James said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Another day in paradise, huh?" After feeding Rusty and himself, James stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, to survey his kingdom such as it was. The morning air was already warm, promising another scorcher. The fields stretched before him, the corn stunted and suffering despite his best efforts with the limited irrigation he could afford. In the distance, he could see the eastern portion of his property, 20 acres he'd been forced to sell 3 years ago to the neighboring Peterson farm. Now part of a massive operation owned by Heartland Agricultural Enterprises, a corporate farming conglomerate. Their corn stood tall and green, benefiting from state-of-the-art irrigation systems and premium seed varieties James couldn't afford. The contrast was a daily reminder of what he was up against. It wasn't just the drought or bad luck. It was a fundamental shift in the economics of farming that favored scale and capital investment over generational knowledge and sweat equity. He was halfway through his morning chores when he heard a vehicle approaching. Glancing at his watch, he frowned. It was barely 7:30 a.m., too early for casual visitors. Through the dust, he recognized the black Tesla from yesterday, now accompanied by a larger SUV. "What in the world?" he muttered to himself as both vehicles pulled up to his gravel driveway. Rusty barked once in alert, but didn't seem particularly concerned. The Tesla's door opened, and Maya Patel emerged, looking as polished as she had the day before, though she'd traded her business attire for more casual dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt. From the SUV, 2 men and a woman emerged, all carrying tablets and looking decidedly professional. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," Maya called out with a wave as she approached. "I hope we're not disturbing you too early." James set down the feed bucket he'd been carrying and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Ms. Patel, didn't expect to see you again. Did you make it to Millfield all right?" "I did, thank you." She gestured to her companions. "This is Derek Wom, my Chief Strategy Officer Sarah Goldstein, our legal counsel, and Michael Chen, our Head of Sustainable Technology." James nodded to each of them, increasingly confused. These weren't lost travelers. "What can I do for you folks?" Maya smiled, a determined glint in her eye. "Mr. Harper, I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you. Do you have some time to talk?" "Business proposition?" James repeated, bafflement evident in his tone. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I've got chores to finish, and I'm not interested in buying whatever you're selling." "I'm not here to sell you anything," Maya clarified. "Quite the opposite, in fact. I'm interested in your land." James's expression hardened. "If you're here from Heartland AG, you can save your breath. I've already told their representatives I'm not selling to them. Even with the foreclosure looming, I'd rather let the bank take it than see it swallowed up by that corporation. And I'm not from Heartland Agricultural Enterprises," Maya said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I'm the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations. We're a technology company specializing in renewable energy and agricultural technology solutions." James stared at her, the name vaguely familiar from news articles he glanced at. "You're that tech company from California? The one working on solar things and fancy farming equipment?" "Among other things, yes," Maya confirmed. "Mr. Harper, I'd like to discuss the possibility of acquiring your property, but not to turn it into another corporate farm. I have something very different in mind. Something that I believe could benefit both of us as this entire community." James looked from Maya to her colleagues and back again, suspicious but intrigued despite himself. "I've got about 20 minutes before I need to fix that water pump over there, or my remaining livestock won't have water today. You want to talk? We can talk while I work." Maya nodded. "That's fair. And perhaps we can help with that pump while we're at it. Michael here is an engineer by training." The man named Michael stepped forward with a friendly smile. "Happy to take a look if you'd like. I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. I'm familiar with water pumps." James hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. This way." As they walked toward the barn where the malfunctioning pump was located, Maya began to outline her proposal. Her words grew increasingly surprising as she continued, causing James to stop in his tracks more than once to stare at her in disbelief. "Let me get this straight," he said, after she'd finished her initial explanation. "You want to buy my farm to build your company headquarters? Here? In the middle of nowhere?" Maya nodded, her expression earnest. "Not just headquarters in the traditional sense. We envision creating an innovation campus, offices, research facilities, demonstration fields, and housing for employees. We would maintain a significant portion as working farmland, integrating our agricultural technology to create a living laboratory for sustainable farming practices." End quote. James shook his head, bewildered. "But why here? Why my land?" "Location, for one thing," Maya explained. "You're within reasonable distance of 3 major universities, which means access to talent. The town of Millfield needs economic revitalization. The surrounding agricultural region aligns James perfectly with our mission to develop technology that helps farmers adapt to changing climate conditions and compete in a challenging market." End quote. "And frankly," she added, looking him directly in the eye, "I believe in signs, Mr. Harper. Meeting you yesterday wasn't a coincidence. Your farm represents exactly the kind of real-world challenge our technology is designed to address. Instead of developing solutions in an isolated bubble in Silicon Valley, we could be creating them right here, in constant dialogue with the very communities we aim to serve." End quote. James snorted. "Sounds like a lot of fancy words for gentrification. You'll buy the land cheap from a desperate farmer. Build your fancy campus, bring in a bunch of city folks who'll drive up all the prices in town, and the locals will end up worse off than before." End quote. Derek, the strategy officer, looked offended, but Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That's a legitimate concern, and precisely the kind of perspective we need. We don't want to be that kind of company. If we move forward with this, we would commit to hiring locally for at least 60% of all non-specialized positions. We would establish training programs at the community college to prepare local residents for more specialized roles. And we would work with the town on affordable housing initiatives to ensure existing residents aren't priced out." End quote. They reached the water pump, and Michael immediately crouched down to examine it. James watched him with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "So what's your offer?" James asked Maya, trying to sound nonchalant despite the hope beginning to flicker in his chest. Whatever they offered would surely be more than the bank would get at auction, which meant he might actually walk away with something instead of nothing. Maya named a figure that made James's jaw drop. It was more than triple what the land was worth, even in better economic times. "That's..." James struggled to find words. "That's absurd. The land isn't worth nearly that much." "The land alone, perhaps not," Maya conceded. "But the location, the opportunity, the story, those have additional value to us. And frankly, we want this to be a true partnership. The price reflects that commitment." "Partnership?" James repeated. "I don't understand." "We'd like you to stay on as a consultant," Maya explained. "Your knowledge of this land, of local farming practices, of the community that's invaluable to us. We're technology experts, but we have a lot to learn about the practical realities of agriculture. You would help bridge that gap." James laughed incredulously. "You want to pay me millions for my failing farm, and then hire me to tell you how to fail at farming?" Michael looked up from the pump with a grin. "No. We want you to help us figure out how not to fail, by combining your expertise with our technology. By the way, your pump isn't broken. There's just a blockage in the intake pipe. If you have a snake tool, I can clear it in about 5 minutes." James pointed to his nearby toolbox. "Red handle, on the left." As Michael retrieved the tool and set to work, James turned back to Maya. "This is all moving very fast. Yesterday you were just a lost traveler, and today you're offering to completely change my life. Why should I trust you?" Sarah, the legal counsel, spoke up for the first time. "That's a fair question. We're prepared to provide references, financial disclosures, and any other information you need to verify our legitimacy. We can also structure the deal with contingencies that protect your bindas interests." Maya added, "We don't expect you to decide today. Take time to think about it. Consult with your own lawyer and financial advisor. We're serious about this proposal, but we want you to be comfortable with any decision you make." James ran a hand through his hair, mind reeling. "And if I say no? Then we look elsewhere," Maya said simply. "We have other options, but I believe this could be something special beneficial for you, for us, for this community. A true win-win scenario if we approach it thoughtfully." The pump suddenly gurgled to life as Michael cleared the blockage. Water began flowing freely through the system again. "There we go," he said, standing up and wiping his hands. Should work fine now, though that gasket is pretty worn. Might want to replace it soon. James stared at the functioning pump, then at the group of tech executives standing in his barn. The situation felt surreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. But the foreclosure notice waiting on his kitchen table was very real, as was the offer Maya Patel had just made. "I need time to think," he said finally. Maya nodded. "Of course. We'll be in town for the next 3 days. Here's my card. Call me anytime if you have questions or want to discuss further." As they prepared to leave, Maya paused. "One more thing, Mr. Harper. Regardless of what you decide about our offer, I'd like to help with your immediate situation. Would you allow us to have our agriculture team take a look at your irrigation system? No strings attached, just a professional assessment that might help you salvage something from this season's crop." James's pride wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. "I suppose that couldn't hurt." "Excellent. I'll have them come by tomorrow, if that works for you." When James nodded, Maya smiled. "Thank you for your time today, Mr. Harper. I look forward to continuing our conversation." As the vehicles disappeared down the dusty road, James stood motionless, trying to process everything that had just occurred. Rusty nudged his hand, bringing him back to the present. "What do you think, boy?" he asked the dog, who tilted his head in response. "Just fell out of the clear blue sky, didn't it?" For the first time in longer than he could remember, James felt something that had become unfamiliar: hope. But mixed with that hope was uncertainty, suspicion, and a nagging fear that somehow this was too good to be true. He pulled out Maya's business card, run his thumb over the embossed logo of Nexus Innovations. Then he reached for his phone. There was one call he needed to make before he could even begin to consider her offer. "Beth? It's James. You're not going to believe what just happened." Beth Harper had always been the practical one in the family. 3 years younger than James, she had left the farm right after high school, earned a business degree in Chicago, and now worked as a financial analyst for a large insurance company. She had built a comfortable life in the city, complete with a condo overlooking Lake Michigan and a calendar full of social engagements. But she had never forgotten her roots, and despite their different life choices, the siblings remained close. "You've got to be kidding me," Beth said, when James finished explaining the morning's events. Her voice carried clearly through his truck's speakers as he drove into town. The first time he'd left the farm in over a week. "Maya Patel came to your farm? The Maya Patel? You know who she is?" James asked, surprised. "James, she's like the Elon Musk of sustainable tech, but without all the controversy. Nexus Innovations is a major player. They went public 3 years ago, and their stock has more than quadrupled since then. They're developing everything from next-generation solar panels to drought-resistant crop varieties." James frowned. "How do you know all this?" "I work in finance, remember? Nexus is on everyone's watch list. Plus, she's one of the few female CEOs of a major tech company and an immigrant success story to boot. She came to the U-Bubs from India for college and built a multi-billion-dollar company from scratch." "Multi-billion?" James repeated, nearly missing a turn in his surprise. "Yes, James. Multi-billion, with a B. So if she's interested in your land, this is serious." Beth paused. "What exactly did she offer?" James named the figure, and there was silence on the other end of the line. "Beth, you still there?" "I'm here," she said finally. "That's substantial. About 5 times what the property is actually worth in today's market." "That's what I thought," James said. "Which is why I'm heading into town to see Dan Jenkins at the bank. Something doesn't add up." "Good idea," Beth agreed. "But James, if this is legitimate, this could be the solution to everything. You could pay off all your debts, have plenty left over to start fresh. By selling the farm," James pointed out, his tone hardening. "Abandoning everything Dad and Grandpa built." Beth sighed, a sound James knew well. It typically preceded one of her practical but unwelcome observations. "James, the farm is already lost. You know that as well as I do. The bank is going to foreclose in less than a month. At least this way, you'd get to decide what happens to the land, and you'd have financial security moving forward." James couldn't argue with her logic, but his heart rebelled against the conclusion. She said they want me to stay on as a consultant, that they'd keep part of it as working farmland. That's unusual, Beth said thoughtfully. But potentially a good sign. It suggests they're serious about integrating into the community rather than just building a corporate campus and remaining isolated. Or it's a way to make the bitter pill easier to swallow. James countered. Maybe, Beth conceded. Look, don't make any decisions yet. Talk to Dan, then call me back. I can do some research on Nexus from my end, see if there's anything concerning in their business practices or financials. Thanks, sis. And James. Beth added. Try to keep an open mind. Change isn't always a bad thing. After ending the call, James drove the rest of the way to Millfield in contemplative silence. The town came into view, its water tower rising above the modest collection of buildings that constituted the main street. Like many rural towns, Millfield had seen better days. Several storefronts were empty, their windows covered with for lease signs that had weathered to illegibility. The furniture factory that had once been the town's economic anchor stood abandoned on the outskirts, its vast parking lot cracked and sprouting weeds. He parked in front of First Millfield Bank, a two-story brick building that remained one of the more prosperous-looking establishments in town. Inside, the air conditioning was a welcome relief from the heat. The teller, Jenny Richards, whom James had known since high school, greeted him with surprise. James Harper. Haven't seen you in here in months. What brings you to town? Need to talk to Dan if he's available, James replied. It's important. Jenny nodded. Let me check if he's free. A few minutes later, James was seated across from Daniel Jenkins, the bank manager and loan officer who had processed the foreclosure notice on his farm. Dan was a few years older than James, with thinning hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. They had played basketball together in high school, but their paths had diverged significantly since then. James, Dan greeted him with a somber nod. I didn't expect to see you until the hearing next month. What can I do for you? James sat forward in his chair. I need some information. Hypothetically speaking, if someone made an offer on my property before the foreclosure goes through, a private sale, would the bank allow that? End quote. Dan's eyebrows rose. Well, sure. If you sell the property and use the proceeds to pay off the loan in full, that would satisfy the bank's claim. We're not in the business of owning farms, James. We just want our money back. He studied James with newfound interest. Are you saying you have a buyer? Maybe, James replied cautiously. I had a visit this morning from some people interested in the property. Heartland Ag again? Dan asked. They've been buying up everything they can in the county. James shook his head. Not Heartland. It's a technology company called Nexus Innovations. Ever heard of them? Dan's eyes widened slightly. The clean energy company? Yes, I've heard of them. They're substantial. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the empty bank lobby. James, are you serious? Nexus is looking at your property? Apparently. They said they're considering it for their new headquarters location. Dan let out a low whistle. That would be transformative for this area. Jobs, investment, tax revenue. It could revitalize the whole county. So, they're legitimate? This isn't some kind of scam? Absolutely legitimate, Dan confirmed. But I have to ask why your land? It's not exactly prime real estate for a corporate headquarters. James shrugged. Something about wanting to be connected to agricultural communities, using the farm as a testing ground for their technology. Their CEO seemed pretty determined. Their CEO? Dan repeated. Maya Patel came to your farm personally? Yeah. Is that unusual? Dan laughed incredulously. James, CEOs of companies that size typically send scouts and representatives for initial property evaluations. They don't show up themselves unless things are very serious. He paused, thinking. What did they offer? If you don't mind me asking, James told him, and Dan's jaw quite literally dropped. That's extremely generous, he managed after a moment. Too generous? James pressed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Why would they offer so much more than the land is worth? Dan considered this. Corporate relocations involve many factors beyond property value. There are tax considerations, PR aspects, strategic advantages. And from what I've read, Nexus is a company that prides itself on its ethics and community impact. They may be willing to pay a premium to ensure a positive relationship with the community they're entering. He leaned back in his chair. Plus, think of it from their perspective. The amount they're offering, while substantial to Wiz, probably a rounding error in their annual budget. For them, it's worth paying extra to secure exactly the right location and to start things off on a positive note. James nodded slowly, processing this. So you think it's legitimate? Not some kind of trick? It sounds legitimate, Dan replied. But of course, you should have any offers reviewed by your own attorney before signing anything. And I'd be happy to look over the financial aspects as well. As a courtesy, he added with a small smile. After all, it's in the bank's interest too, if you can pay off your loan. James stood to leave, feeling slightly more reassured but still overwhelmed. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the advice. One more thing, James, Dan said as he walked him to the door. If this goes through, you'll need solid financial planning. That's a significant sum, and without proper management, even large windfalls can disappear surprisingly quickly. I'll keep that in mind. James promised, though financial planning was the least of his concerns at the moment. As he left the bank, James noticed increased activity in town. There were more cars parked along Main Street than usual, and he spotted a news van from the regional television station outside the town hall. Curious, he made his way over. A small crowd had gathered, mostly locals he recognized. Mayor Williams stood on the town hall steps, addressing the assembled group. Next to him stood Maya Patel, looking composed despite the clear excitement rippling through the audience. James approached quietly, standing at the back as the mayor spoke. Potential economic opportunity for our community, Mayor Williams was saying. Ms. Patel and her company are exploring several locations for their new headquarters, and Millfield is honored to be among the contenders. While nothing is finalized yet, I can tell you that Nexus Innovations represents exactly the kind of sustainable, forward-thinking investment our town needs. Maya stepped forward to speak. Thank you, Mayor Williams. As the mayor mentioned, we're still in the exploratory phase, but I can share that my visit to Millfield has been incredibly positive. We at Nexus believe in the untapped potential of rural communities, and we're excited about the possibility of becoming part of this one. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Patel, why consider a small town like Millfield when most tech companies are consolidating in established hubs? Maya smiled. That's precisely why. Innovation doesn't only happen in Silicon Valley, or Austin, or Boston. By embedding ourselves in a community like Millfield, we gain perspectives and insights that are impossible to access from the tech bubble. Our mission is to develop technology that serves real people facing real challenges. What better way to ensure we're on the right track than to live and work alongside those very communities? Another reporter called out, Is it true you're looking at the old Harper farm property? James stiffened at the mention of his name. Maya's expression remained neutral, but her eyes scanned the crowd until they found him standing at the back. Their gazes locked briefly before she returned her attention to the reporter. We're exploring several properties in the area, she replied diplomatically. It would be premature to discuss specific locations while negotiations are ongoing. The press conference continued. But James had heard enough. The fact that his farm was already being discussed publicly when he hadn't even decided whether to grass. Consider the offer left him feeling exposed and somehow manipulated. Had Maya deliberately created this public spectacle to pressure him? To make it harder for him to say no when the entire town was clearly excited about the prospect? He slipped away from the crowd, irritation building. By the time he reached his truck, he'd made up his mind to call Maya and tell her the deal was off. But he wasn't interested in being part of some corporate PR stunt. But as he pulled out his phone, it rang in his hand. Beth's name flashed on the screen. James? I've been doing some research on Nexus, she said without preamble when he answered. Their financials are solid. They've been profitable for 6 quarters straight. They have a diverse revenue stream, and their growth projections are strong. No red flags that I can see. What about their business practices? James asked, still watching the crowd around the town hall from his truck. Any complaints from communities where they operate? Environmental violations? Labor issues? Actually, quite the opposite, Beth replied. They consistently rank among the top companies for employee satisfaction. They have an excellent environmental record. They're carbon negative across all operations and have won several sustainability awards. And they're known for their community engagement initiatives. In San Diego, where they have a research facility, they've funded STEM programs in local schools, established scholarships, and created an incubator for local entrepreneurs. James frowned. It all sounded too perfect. Nobody's that good. There must be something. Beth sighed. James, sometimes good opportunities actually are good opportunities. Not everything is a trap. She paused. Did you speak with Dan? Yeah. He confirmed they're legitimate. Said the offer makes sense from their perspective. James watched as Maya shook hands with community members, her manner warm and engaged. But now they're holding some kind of press conference in town, talking about their interest in Millfield. Someone even mentioned our farm specifically. It feels like they're trying to create public pressure. Or they're doing what any company would do, exploring community reception before making a major investment, Beth suggested. James, I understand your suspicion. After everything you've been through, it's natural to expect the worst. But from everything I can see, this is a genuine opportunity, maybe the best one you'll ever get. James was silent for a long moment, watching as Maya laughed at something Mayor Williams said, the sunlight catching her profile. Despite his irritation, he couldn't deny that there was something compelling about her vision, her confidence, her apparent sincerity. I need to think, he said finally. This is all happening too fast. Of course, Beth agreed. Take the time you need. But James, don't let pride or fear make this decision for you. Think about the future, not just the past. After ending the call, James sat in his truck for several minutes, conflicting emotions warring within him. Eventually, he started the engine and drove out of town, bypassing the road that would take him back to the farm. Instead, he headed for Weston's Ridge, a high point overlooking the valley where generations of Harpers had lived and worked. The old dirt road leading up to the ridge was rough and rarely traveled these days. James parked near the top and walked the remaining distance, the sun high overhead and merciless. When he reached the summit, he stood silent, taking in the panoramic view. From this vantage point, he could see most of what had once been Harper land, now divided among different owners. His remaining 50 acres were clearly visible, the fields showing the stress of the drought. Beyond them, the green expanse of the Heartland AG operation provided a stark contrast. Millfield lay to the east, the sun glinting off the water tower. This had been his father's thinking spot. Whenever Henry Harper had faced a difficult decision or needed clarity, he would drive up to this ridge. Perspective, he used to say. Sometimes you need to step back to see the whole picture. James wondered what his father would advise now. Henry had been fiercely independent and deeply attached to the land, but he'd also been practical. He'd survived the farm crisis of the 1980 by adapting, diversifying, making tough choices that allowed the family to keep the core of their holdings when many neighbors lost everything. Would he see Maya's offer as surrender or as adaptation? As an end or a new beginning? James hadn't brought lunch or water, but he remained on the ridge for hours, watching the shadows lengthen as the afternoon progressed. By the time he finally descended, the sun was low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the land. His decision wasn't final. He still wanted to learn more, to verify the details, but he had a direction now, a tentative path forward. As he drove back to the farm, he composed the message he would send to Maya Patel. I'm willing to discuss your proposal further, but I have conditions. Maya's response came within minutes. I'd expect nothing less. Breakfast tomorrow at your convenience? James suggested 7 a.m. at his farmhouse early, enough to accommodate his morning chores, and home field advantage for what promised to be a pivotal conversation. The following morning, Maya arrived precisely at 7, this time alone. She exited her Tesla, carrying a large paper bag that emitted enticing aromas. "Good morning," she called out as James emerged from the barn. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought breakfast from Millie's diner in town. The woman at the counter, Doris, I think, said you were partial to their blueberry pancakes." James couldn't help but smile slightly. Doris had been serving him blueberry pancakes since he was a child, accompanying his father on Saturday morning trips to town. "Doris has a big mouth, but she makes the best pancakes in the county. Come on in." The farmhouse kitchen was clean but sparse, with minimal decorative touches. A few faded family photos hung on the wall, and a decade-old calendar from the local feed store displayed a scene of hay baling from June 2015, suggesting it had been kept for the image rather than any practical purpose. Maya set the food on the kitchen table and glanced around, taking in details without comment. James appreciated her restraint. He was in no mood for either pity or false admiration of his modest living conditions. They sat across from each other, the rich aroma of pancakes, bacon, and coffee filling the small space. Maya waited for James to take the first bite before starting herself. "So," she said after a moment, "you mentioned conditions. I'm listening." James had spent much of the night refining his thoughts, consulting with Beth by phone, and researching Nexus Innovations online. He was prepared. "First, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. You want to buy my entire property, all 50 acres, for the purpose of building your company headquarters and research facilities, correct?" Maya nodded. "Yes, though as I mentioned, we would maintain a significant portion as working agricultural land." "That's part of my conditions," James said firmly. "At least 20 acres must remain farmland in perpetuity, with conservation easements to prevent future development, and not just for show real productive farmland." "Agreed," Maya replied without hesitation. "That aligns with our vision anyway. We want to demonstrate sustainable farming practices using our technology." James was slightly taken aback by her immediate agreement but pressed on. "Second, I want a meaningful role in this project, not just a courtesy title to make me feel better about selling my heritage. If you're serious about bridging the gap between tech and agriculture, I want to be actively involved in the agricultural research and implementation." End quote. Maya was nodding before he even finished. "Absolutely. In fact, we'd like to create a position specifically for you, Director of Agricultural Integration. You would work directly with our research teams to ensure our technology addresses real-world farming challenges. Your practical knowledge would be invaluable in helping us refine our innovations." James blinked. "You've already thought about a specific role?" "Of course," Maya said, as if it were obvious. "James, your expertise is a significant asset. We're not just buying land. We're hoping to incorporate generations of farming knowledge into our work. That's not something we can easily find elsewhere." Her words were gratifying, but James remained cautious. "Third condition, local impact. I want binding commitments about local hiring, training programs for residents, and measures to prevent housing costs from skyrocketing when your employees move in." Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. "We've already drafted an initial community impact plan. We're proposing that at least 60% of all non-specialized positions be filled locally, with training programs at Millfield Community College to prepare residents for more specialized roles over time." End quote. She handed him the tablet. "We've also outlined a housing strategy that includes subsidized housing for existing residents and zoning recommendations to prevent unchecked speculation." James scrolled through the document, impressed despite himself by the level of detail. "You've put a lot of thought into this." "We have," Maya confirmed. "This isn't just about finding a cheaper location than Silicon Valley. It's about reimagining what a technology company can be and how it can integrate with a community." She paused. "Do you have other conditions?" James set down the tablet. "One more. I want my sister Beth involved in the financial aspects. She's a financial analyst in Chicago, and I trust her judgment. Any agreements we make, she reviews first." "Fair enough," Maya agreed. "We can arrange a call with her today if you'd like, or fly her out here to participate in person." James nodded, satisfied with her responses, but still processing the enormity of what they were discussing. They ate in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the occasional bark from Rusty outside and the distant call of a crow. "Can I ask you something?" James said finally. "Of course. Why are you really doing this?" "Not just buying my farm, but all of it. Moving your entire company from California to the middle of nowhere, focusing on agriculture when tech companies make their billions on smartphones and social media apps. What's your angle?" Maya set down her fork, considering the question seriously. "It's not an angle, James. It's a conviction." She looked out the window at the struggling fields beyond. "I grew up in a small farming village in Gujarat, India. My father was a rice farmer who struggled with many of the same challenges you face: unpredictable weather, rising costs, competition from industrial operations. When I was 12, a severe drought destroyed our crop, and we lost nearly everything." End quote. James watched her face as she spoke, noting the shadows of old pain in her expression. An agricultural extension program introduced new drought-resistant rice varieties and more efficient irrigation techniques to our village the following year. It transformed everything, not just for my family, but for the entire community. That's when I understood the power of applied technology to solve real problems. She turned back to face him. "I came to America to study engineering because I wanted to create solutions like that. But somewhere along the way, I've watched the tech industry become increasingly disconnected from the realities faced by most people. We create products for urban professionals with disposable income while ignoring the fundamental challenges in food production, water access, energy, the basics that everyone needs. Nexus was founded to refocus technology on those fundamentals. Yes, we've been successful in Silicon Valley, but we're at risk of the same disconnection that affects other tech companies. Moving here isn't just about lower costs or tax incentives, it's about grounding our innovation in the actual needs of communities like this one." She leaned forward slightly. "The future of this planet depends on finding sustainable ways to produce food, generate energy, and manage water. Those solutions won't come from isolated tech campuses in Silicon Valley. They'll come from places like this, where the challenges are lived daily." James studied her, looking for signs of insincerity or rehearsed talking points. But her gaze was steady, her expression earnest. "You actually believe all that?" he said, somewhat surprised. "I do," she replied simply. "Do you find that hard to accept?" James considered the question. "I've spent the last decade watching prices fall, costs rise, and corporate interests dictate agricultural policy. I've seen neighbors lose farms that had been in their families for generations. So yes, I find it hard to believe that a billionaire tech CEO genuinely cares about rural communities and small farmers." Maya didn't flinch at his bluntness. "That's fair. You have no reason to trust my intentions based on words alone. But I hope our actions, both in this negotiation and in the years to come, if we reach an agreement, will demonstrate our commitment." The conversation continued as they finished breakfast, delving into more specific details of the proposed project. Maya explained the phased development plan, the types of facilities they envisioned, and the agricultural research initiatives they wanted to pursue. James asked pointed questions about water usage, environmental impact, and traffic considerations. When the meal was finished, Maya helped James clear the table without being asked. A small gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "So what happens next?" James asked as he rinsed the last plate. "If you're open to continuing discussions, I'd like to bring my team back tomorrow for a more formal presentation of our plans. We can address any additional questions or concerns you have." She hesitated. "And perhaps we could arrange a video call with your sister as well?" James nodded. "I'll check with Beth about her availability." He glanced out the window at his fields. "The agricultural team you mentioned yesterday, are they still planning to look at my irrigation system?" "Yes, they'll be here around noon, if that works for you." "I'll be here." As Maya prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Thank you for being willing to consider our proposal, James. I know this isn't an easy decision for you." "I haven't decided anything yet," he reminded her. "I understand. But the willingness to listen, to engage with the possibility of change, that takes courage." She extended her hand. "Until tomorrow?" James shook her hand, noting once again the contrast between her smooth palm and his calloused one. "Until tomorrow." As Maya's Tesla disappeared down the driveway, James turned to Rusty, who had been watching the proceedings with canine curiosity. Well, boy, what do you think? Are we really considering this? Rusty's tail thumped against the porch. Bort's not exactly a definitive answer, but perhaps as good as any James could expect. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine chores. Though James found his mind constantly returning to the conversation with Maya and the possibilities it presented. Around noon, as promised, a Nexus Innovations van arrived, carrying 3 people who introduced themselves as agricultural technology specialists. They surveyed his irrigation system, soil conditions, and crop health with a thoroughness that impressed even James, who prided himself on his attention to detail when it came to his land. Your basic setup is sound, the lead specialist, a woman named Priya, told him after their initial assessment, but it's severely outdated and inefficient. With your permission, we'd like to install some temporary monitoring equipment to gather data on soil moisture, nutrient levels, and water flow patterns. This would give us a clearer picture of what improvements would yield the best results. James hesitated only briefly before agreeing. They had emphasized that the monitoring was non-invasive and temporary. And frankly, he was curious about what their fancy sensors might reveal about his struggling fields. As the team worked, James received a call from Beth. "I've been reading through the financial documentation Maya sent over," she said without preamble. "James, it's solid. The offer is actually better than what you told me. There are performance bonuses, equity options, and a comprehensive benefits package for your consulting role." "So you think I should accept?" "I think you should continue the discussions," Beth replied carefully. "I've set up a video call with their legal and financial team for tomorrow morning. I want to clarify a few points and negotiate some additional protections for you. But overall, yes, I think this could be an excellent opportunity." James watched as the Nexus team installed a small solar-powered sensor node at the edge of his cornfield. "It still feels like I'm giving up, Beth. Like I'm failing Dad and Grandpa." Beth was quiet for a moment. "James, do you remember what Dad always said about farming?" "He said a lot of things about farming. He said it's not about blind tradition. It's about stewardship. About preserving the land for future generations, even if that means adapting how it's used." Beth's voice softened. "Dad was a pragmatist, James. He changed crops when the market shifted. He adopted new techniques when they made sense. He wasn't resistant to change. He just wanted to ensure the changes served the long-term health of the land and the community." James felt a tightness in his throat. This is a pretty big change from growing corn and soybeans. "It is," Beth agreed. "But if what Maya is proposing is true, if they really do plan to maintain part of the land as working farmland, to develop agricultural technology that helps small farmers compete, to create jobs and investment in the community, wouldn't Dad see that as good stewardship?" End quote. James couldn't immediately answer. Beth, sensing his emotion, changed the subject to logistical details about the upcoming video call, giving him time to compose himself. After they ended the call, James walked out to where the Nexus team was working. Priya looked up from her tablet, which was displaying a complex array of data readings. "Mr. Harper, we're getting excellent baseline data already. These sensors are detecting significant variations in soil moisture that your current irrigation system isn't addressing." "Meaning?" "Meaning even with limited water resources, you could potentially increase efficiency by 40% with targeted irrigation based on real-time soil conditions." She showed him the tablet screen, pointing out the different colored zones representing varying moisture levels. "See these dry patches here and here? Your current system is applying water evenly across the field, which means some areas get too much and others not enough." James studied the display with interest. "And you can fix that?" "Absolutely. With a precision irrigation system guided by soil sensors, you could deliver the exact amount of water needed to each specific area. Less waste, better crop health, higher yields." She hesitated. "Of course, the initial investment in such a system is significant, which is why many small farms can't afford to implement it, despite the long-term savings." "Which is exactly the problem your company is trying to solve," James said, understanding dawning. "Making this kind of technology accessible to operations like mine." Priya nodded. "Precisely. Most ag tech is currently designed for massive corporate farms that can afford million-dollar investments. We're working to scale the technology and reduce costs to make it viable for small to mid-sized operations. For the first time, James began to see the concrete reality behind Maya's vision. This wasn't just about moving a corporate headquarters. It was about developing solutions to the very problems that had been slowly strangling his farm and thousands like it across the country. As the day wore on, James found himself engaging more deeply with the Nexus team, asking questions about their technology, suggesting improvements based on his practical experience, pointing out challenges they might not have considered. By the time they packed up their equipment in the late afternoon, promising to return with a more detailed analysis, James realized he had spent hours in the kind of stimulating, productive conversation he hadn't experienced in years. That evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sunset with Rusty at his feet, James allowed himself to really imagine what the future might look like if he accepted Maya's proposal. Not just his personal financial situation, though that would certainly improve dramatically, but the broader impact on the community, on agriculture, perhaps even on the relationship between technology and rural America. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders for years seemed to lighten slightly. For the first time in a long while, he found himself looking forward to the next day with something approaching optimism. The following morning brought another round of revelations and discussions. Beth joined via video call from Chicago, her professional demeanor and incisive questions clearly impressing Maya's team. She negotiated several additional protections for James, including a right of first refusal if Nexus ever decided to sell the property, and explicit language about his role in the agricultural research initiatives. The presentation from Nexus's development team revealed plans far more thoughtful and integrated with the local landscape than James had anticipated. Rather than imposing a sterile corporate campus on the rural setting, their architects had designed buildings that complemented the natural contours of the land, incorporated sustainable materials, and included extensive green spaces. The agricultural portions of the property would be enhanced with state-of-the-art irrigation, soil monitoring, and renewable energy systems, serving as both working farmland and living laboratories for new techniques and technologies. Throughout the day, as different specialists presented aspects of the plan, James found himself increasingly engaged, offering suggestions and insights that were met with genuine interest and appreciation. By late afternoon, when the formal presentations concluded, he had moved from skepticism to cautious excitement. After the Nexus team departed, promising to return the following day with revised plans incorporating his input, James called Beth to debrief. "So?" she asked. "What are you thinking now?" James leaned against the porch railing, watching the evening shadows stretch across his fields. "I'm thinking," he began slowly, "that this might actually be the right thing to do, not just financially, but for the land, for the community, maybe even for Dad's legacy in a way I hadn't considered before." I agree," Beth said, the relief evident in her voice. "Their plans are impressive, James, and they seem genuinely committed to doing this right, not just dropping a corporate office in the middle of farmland and calling it innovation. Maya's passionate about it," James now acknowledged. "I believe she really does want to create something different here." "So, you're going to accept?" James took a deep breath. "I think so, but I want to talk to a few people in town first, get a sense of how the community feels about all this. After all, they'll be affected too." "That's a good idea," Beth approved. "Responsible. Dad would be proud of you for thinking of the bigger picture." The mention of their father still brought a pang, but it was less sharp now, softened by the growing conviction that this new direction might be a continuation of his legacy rather than an abandonment of it. The next morning, James drove into Millfield early. His first stop was Millie's Diner, where locals gathered for breakfast and where the town's unofficial opinion forming happened over coffee and pancakes. As he entered, conversations paused briefly as people recognized him, then resumed with increased energy. Doris waved him to the counter. "Well, look who's gracing us with his presence twice in 1 week," she said with a smile, pouring him coffee without asking. "Hear you've been having some interesting visitors out at your place." James smiled wryly. "News travels fast." "Always has," Doris agreed, setting down a menu he didn't need. Blueberry pancakes? You know me too well. As Doris called his order to the kitchen, James became aware of Frank Porter, the owner of the hardware store, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Morning, James," Frank greeted him. "Quite the commotion you stirred up." "Not intentionally," James replied. Frank stirred sugar into his coffee. "So, is it true? Nexus Innovations is looking to buy your place?" James nodded. "They've made an offer. I'm considering it." "Considering it?" Frank raised his eyebrows. "From what I hear, they're offering you a small fortune. What's to consider? It's not just about the money, Frank. It's about what happens to the land, to the community." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Well, for what it's worth, most folks around here are pretty excited about the possibility. Jobs, investment, the kind of opportunity this town hasn't seen in decades." James glanced around the diner, noticing several people watching their conversation with undisguised interest. "What about you? You've had your store here for what, 30 years? How would something like this affect your business?" Frank chuckled. "Are you kidding? Having a major company with hundreds of employees move in? I'd probably have to hire extra help for the first time since my son went off to college. Maybe even expand the store." He sipped his coffee. "Look, James, I understand your attachment to the farm. But sometimes change is necessary, especially when the alternative is watching everything you've built simply disappear." Over the next hour, as James ate his pancakes and moved around the diner greeting various neighbors and acquaintances, he heard similar sentiments repeatedly. The town was buzzing with excitement about the potential arrival of Nexus Innovations, seeing it as a lifeline for a community that had been slowly dying for years. Mayor Williams arrived as James was finishing his meal and made a beeline for his table. "James, just the man I wanted to see." The mayor sat down without waiting for an invitation. "I hope you don't mind my forthrightness, but the town council is very interested in the discussions you're having with Nexus Innovations." James raised an eyebrow. "Seems like everyone is." The mayor had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Small towns, you know how it is. But this is potentially transformative for Millfield, James. The economic impact assessment our development office put together suggests we could see over 1,000 new jobs, millions in additional tax revenue, revitalization of our downtown." "I understand all that," James interrupted. "But what about the downsides? Increased traffic, rising housing costs, changing character of the community?" Mayor Williams nodded vigorously. "All legitimate concerns. And exactly why we want to be proactive. We've already begun discussions with Nexus about a comprehensive development agreement that would address those issues. They seem remarkably receptive, far more so than most in companies of their size." James wasn't surprised by this information. It aligned with what Maya had told him about their approach to community integration. But hearing it confirmed independently was reassuring. "So the town government is supportive of this potential development?" "Enthusiastically so," the mayor confirmed. "But," he added with sudden seriousness, "we also respect that this is ultimately your decision, James. It's your land, your heritage. No one should pressure you one way or the other." James appreciated the sentiment, though he suspected the mayor would be singing a different tune if he was leaning toward rejection. "I appreciate that, Meyer. I'm still considering all aspects of the proposal." Before leaving the diner, James had conversations with several other longtime residents, including his former high school teacher, the local veterinarian who treated Rusty, and the elderly couple who ran the feed store. The consensus was clear. While there were legitimate concerns about rapid change, the potential benefits for the struggling town far outweighed the risks. Millfield needed this opportunity. As James drove back to his farm, his mind was made up. The agricultural team from Nexus had returned with their detailed analysis, showing him exactly how their technology could transform the productivity of his land, or rather, what would soon be their land. He spent several hours with them, ensuring that his knowledge of the property's quirks and challenges would be preserved and incorporated into their plans. When Maya arrived late in the afternoon, for what they had agreed would be his final decision, James was waiting on the porch, Rusty at his side. "I've made my decision," he said as she approached. Maya nodded, her expression calm but expectant. "And? I'm accepting your offer, with the conditions we discussed. But I have one additional request." "Name it." James gestured to the farmhouse behind him. "This house. My grandfather built it with his own hands. And my father expanded it. I know you'll probably need to reconfigure much of the property for your facilities, but if possible, I'd like the house to remain, to be preserved, even if it's repurposed." Maya smiled. "Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. Our architects have already incorporated the farmhouse into their designs as the centerpiece of our agricultural research center. We thought it would be a fitting symbol of the bridge between traditional farming knowledge and technological innovation." End quote. James felt a wave of emotion that he hadn't anticipated. The thought that the house would remain, would continue to serve a purpose connected to the land, meant more to him than he could express. "Then I believe we have a deal," he said, extending his hand. Maya shook it firmly. "A partnership," she corrected gently. "The beginning of something new, not just the end of something old." As they stood there on the porch of the farmhouse that had sheltered generations of Harpers, James felt a strange sense of coming full circle. 3 days ago, he had been a struggling farmer facing foreclosure, his family's legacy slipping through his fingers. Now, he was looking at a future he couldn't have imagined, one where the land would continue to serve a purpose, where his knowledge would be valued, where his family's legacy would evolve rather than disappear. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Legal documents were drafted, reviewed, and signed. Surveys were conducted. Environmental assessments were completed. Through it all, James remained actively involved, insisting on clarity and precision in every aspect of the agreement. Maya respected his thoroughness, recognizing that this wasn't just a business transaction for him, but the transformation of his heritage. News of the deal spread quickly throughout the region. Local media covered it extensively, highlighting the potential economic impact for Millfield and surrounding communities. National business publications picked up the story as well, fascinated by the unconventional decision of a major tech company to relocate to rural America. "Nexus Innovations breaks Silicon Valley mold with rural headquarters," read one headline. "Tech meets agriculture, a new model for innovation," proclaimed another. The day the sale formally closed, James stood in his kitchen, now legally Nexus property. Though he would continue living there during the transition, holding the final paperwork and a cashier's check that represented more money than he had ever expected to see in his lifetime. Beth had flown in for the occasion, and she watched her brother with a mixture of relief and concern. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. James considered the question seriously. "Honestly, a bit numb, grateful, sad, excited, pretty much every emotion at once." Beth smiled sympathetically. "That makes sense. It's a massive change. The funny thing is," James said, setting down the paperwork, "I keep thinking about that day Maya first drove up, asking for directions. If she'd had better cell reception, if her GPS had worked properly, if she'd taken the highway instead of the back roads. Maybe it wasn't just chance," Beth suggested. "Maybe her getting lost was the universe's way of making something right." James chuckled. "Now you sound like Dad with all his talk about the land having its own wisdom." He paused, growing serious again. "Do you think he would understand? That I sold the farm?" Beth placed her hand over his. "I think he would be proud of you for finding a way to preserve what matters most, the connection to the land, the contribution to the community, the carrying forward of knowledge. The farm isn't just dirt and buildings, James. It's what it represents, what it does. And in a different way, that will continue." "But," James nodded, finding comfort in her words. After a moment, he said, "I should show you the preliminary construction plans. They incorporated several of my suggestions for the agricultural research areas." As James led his sister outside to show her where the various facilities would be located, Rusty trotting alongside them, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The crushing weight of impending failure had lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility he had almost forgotten. 6 months later, the transformation of the Harper farm was well underway. The first phase of construction had begun, focusing on the Agricultural Research Center with the farmhouse at its heart. James had taken on his role as Director of Agricultural Integration with enthusiasm, splitting his time between consulting on the construction and working with Nexus's research teams on adaptations of their technology for small farm applications. Maya had kept her word in every respect. 20 acres of the property remained active farmland, now serving as a testing ground for innovative sustainable farming techniques. The conservation easements ensuring this land would never be developed were legally binding and attached to the deed. Local hiring had already begun, with dozens of Millfield residents employed in the construction phase and training programs established at the community college for future positions. The impact on the town was visible almost immediately. Vacant storefronts on Main Street were being renovated as new businesses anticipated the influx of workers and visitors. Housing construction had begun on previously abandoned properties, with strict affordability requirements as Maya had promised. The old furniture factory was being repurposed as a fabrication facility for Nexus's agricultural equipment prototypes, bringing manufacturing jobs back to a town that had lost them years ago. James had moved into a newly built house at the edge of the property, designed to his specifications and positioned so he could see both the experimental fields and the rising framework of the main campus buildings. It was modern but intentionally reminiscent of the traditional farmhouse, a bridge between past and future that reflected his own evolving role. On a crisp fall morning, James stood with Maya at the highest point of the property, reviewing the progress. Construction crews worked below them, the site buzzing with activity. The frame of the main headquarters building was taking shape, its design incorporating sustainable materials and renewable energy systems that would allow it to operate with minimal environmental impact. "We're ahead of schedule," Maya noted with satisfaction. "The first research teams should be able to move in by early spring, and full operations by late summer." James nodded, surveying the scene. "The agricultural test plots are already yielding interesting data. The sensor-guided irrigation system improved water efficiency by 43% compared to traditional methods, even better than your ban," team predicted. Maya smiled. "Your knowledge of the soil conditions made the difference there. The engineers had theory, but you had experience." "Speaking of experience," James said, "I've been thinking about the mentorship program we discussed, pairing your young engineers with local farmers for knowledge exchange. I've talked to about a dozen farmers in the county who are interested in participating." "That's excellent," Maya replied enthusiastically. "That kind of practical feedback is invaluable. We should set up a formal structure for the program before the main research teams arrive." They continued discussing operational details as they walked back down the hill. Their working relationship had evolved over the months into one of mutual respect and genuine collaboration. James had initially worried that his role might be more symbolic than substantive, but Maya had consistently sought and valued his input on everything from building placement to research priorities. As they approached the farmhouse, now surrounded by scaffolding as it underwent careful renovation, Maya paused. "I have some news that might interest you. The sensor technology we're testing here has attracted attention from the Department of Agriculture. They're considering adopting it for their assistance programs for small farms nationwide." James raised his eyebrows. "Already? I thought we were at least a year from that kind of implementation." "Normally, yes. But the preliminary results have been so promising that they want to fast-track a pilot program." Maya's expression grew more serious. "This could be transformative, James. Thousands of small farms like yours like this was struggling with drought and trying to compete with corporate operations. This technology could help level the playing field." James felt a swell of emotion he hadn't anticipated. The idea that his land, his situation, might ultimately lead to solutions for farmers across the country added a dimension of meaning to the changes he'd accepted. "My father would have loved that," he said quietly. "He always said farming wasn't just about feeding people, but about stewardship, caring for the land so it can feed future generations. This is a different kind of stewardship than he imagined, but the purpose is the same." Maya nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. Different methods, same values. That's what we're trying to build here, technology that serves those enduring values instead of replacing them. As they continued their tour of the construction site, greeting workers and checking on various aspects of the project, James reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The lost traveler who had asked for directions on a dusty back road had indeed changed his life forever, but not in the way he could have possibly imagined. What had seemed like the end of his family's legacy was becoming its evolution, instead a new chapter rather than the closing of the book. That evening, as James sat on the porch of his new home with Rusty at his feet, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples over the construction site and experimental fields, he felt a deep sense of rightness settle over him. The land was still being cared for. Knowledge was still being passed on. The community was being revitalized, and he was still a part of it all, not as a struggling farmer fighting a losing battle against forces beyond his control, but as a bridge between traditions and innovations, between the wisdom of the past and the possibilities of the future. His phone buzzed with a message from Beth. Just saw the article about the Department of Agriculture interest in the sensor technology. Dad would be so proud. You found a way to help not just our farm, but farms everywhere. And James smiled and typed a reply. It wasn't what I expected, but maybe it's what the land needed. A new kind of harvest. As he sent the message and turned his gaze back to the horizon, James thought about the seemingly random event that had brought Maya Patel to his farm that day. A GPS failure, a wrong turn, a request for directions. Sometimes, he reflected, being lost was the only way to find a new path forward. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. The Nexus Innovations campus stood as a harmonious blend of modern architecture and agricultural landscape, a physical embodiment of the company's mission to bridge technology and rural life. The main headquarters building, with its dramatic sweeping lines and abundant natural light, housed administrative offices, software development teams, and collaborative workspace for over 300 employees, more than half of them local hires, as promised. Adjacent to the main building, the Agricultural Research Center operated from the renovated farmhouse and newly constructed laboratories, where engineers and agronomists worked alongside experienced farmers to refine and develop new technological solutions for sustainable agriculture. The experimental fields showcased a variety of innovative approaches, from precision irrigation systems to soil health monitoring networks to drone-assisted crop management. The economic impact on Millfield had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Downtown storefronts were fully occupied for the first time in decades. The community college had expanded its technical programs to meet the growing demand for skilled workers. New housing developments balanced the needs of incoming employees with affordability protections for existing residents. The town had a renewed sense of purpose and vitality that was palpable to anyone who visited. James had grown into his role with confidence and enthusiasm. His office in the Agricultural Research Center, formerly his father's bedroom in the farmhouse, was a fitting symbol of the continuity amid change that characterized the entire project. His knowledge of the land, the local growing conditions, and the practical challenges of farming had proven invaluable to the research teams, helping them avoid theoretical solutions that wouldn't work in real-world conditions. More importantly, James had become an effective ambassador between the technology company and the agricultural community. Farmers who might have been skeptical of innovations developed by city-dwelling engineers were willing to listen when James vouched for their practicality. His mentorship program, pairing young Nexus engineers with experienced local farmers, had become a model that the company was replicating in other regions where they were testing their agricultural technology. On the anniversary of the formal agreement between James and Nexus, a celebration was held on the campus grounds. Employees, community members, and various dignitaries gathered under a massive tent erected near the experimental fields. The contrast between the sleek, modern headquarters building and the carefully preserved farmhouse provided a perfect backdrop for an event celebrating the fusion of tradition and innovation. Maya took the podium first, her confidence and passion as evident as ever, though tempered now with a year's worth of lessons learned from rural integration. When we announced our intention to relocate from Silicon Valley to rural America, many thought we were making a mistake, she began. Industry analysts predicted we would struggle to attract talent, that we would lose our competitive edge, that we would regret abandoning the tech ecosystem we had been part of for so long. She smiled, gesturing to the thriving campus around them. They were wrong. What we found here in Millfield was exactly what our company needed: a connection to the real world, challenges our technology aims to address. A community that values substance over hype, and perspectives that would never have been represented in our previous location. End quote. Maya continued, outlining the achievements of the past year. The successful launch of their next-generation agricultural monitoring systems, the partnerships formed with regional farming cooperatives, the Department of Agriculture pilot program that was now operating in 5 states, the economic revitalization of Millfield, and the environmental improvements to the former Harper farm. But none of this would have been possible, she said, her tone growing more personal, without the wisdom, courage, and vision of one man. When I first met James Harper, I was literally lost, both geographically and, in some ways, philosophically. Our company had achieved financial success, but we were in danger of losing sight of our core mission: to create technology that solves real problems for real people. She turned toward James, who sat in the front row. James didn't just give us directions that day. He ultimately helped us find our way back to our purpose. The partnership we formed has become the foundation of everything we've built here: a true collaboration between technological innovation and generational wisdom, between progress and heritage, between future possibilities and enduring values. When James took the podium after Maya's introduction, he felt a momentary surge of nervousness. Public speaking had never been his forte. He was more comfortable in the fields than at a microphone. But as he looked out at the gathered crowd, familiar faces from town, Nexus employees he had come to know over the past year, Beth beaming proudly from the front row, he found his voice. A year ago, I was a struggling farmer about to lose everything my family had built over 3 generations, he began candidly. The drought, falling prices, rising costs, it was a perfect storm that many small farmers across this country are still facing. He paused, looking toward the experimental fields where new crops were flourishing, despite the continuing regional drought conditions. What happened next still seems like something from a movie sometimes. A lost traveler asks for directions, and she turns out to be a tech CEO looking for a place to build a new headquarters. There was appreciative laughter from the audience. If you'd told me then what my farm would become, what my role would be, I wouldn't have believed you. And I certainly wouldn't have believed the impact it would have on our community. James spoke about the changes he'd witnessed in Millfield over the past year, the farmers who had begun adopting technologies developed on his former land, and the renewed sense of possibility in a town that had been slowly dying. My father used to say that a farm isn't just about the current harvest, but about maintaining the soil for future generations. I think the same is true for communities. What we're building here isn't just about today's technology or today's jobs. It's about creating sustainable systems that will support this community and others like it for generations to come. He concluded by addressing Maya directly. Thank you for getting lost that day, and thank you for seeing possibilities in this land that even I had stopped seeing. The partnership we formed has created something neither of us could have achieved alone, and I'm proud to be part of it. The applause was warm and genuine. As James returned to his seat, he caught sight of Rusty, who had been allowed to attend the event as a special guest, sitting contentedly at Beth's feet. The old dog had adapted to the changes with remarkable ease, perhaps, James thought with amusement, more easily than he had himself. The celebration continued into the evening, with tours of the facilities, demonstrations of the agricultural technology being developed, and a community dinner featuring produce grown in the experimental fields. As twilight fell, subtle lighting illuminated the campus, highlighting the architectural features of the headquarters building and casting a warm glow on the historic farmhouse. James found himself standing with Maya at the edge of the gathering, watching as Nexus employees and townspeople mingled freely, the distinctions between them increasingly blurred after a year of integration. It worked. James said simply. What you envisioned it actually worked. Maya nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. It did. Though not without challenges and adjustments along the way. The best things usually require both, James observed. My father would have called it earned success, the kind that comes from facing difficulties honestly and working through them with integrity. Your father sounds like a wise man, Maya said. I wish I could have met him. So do I. But I think he would approve of what's happened here. It's different from what he imagined for the farm, but the essential values are the same: stewardship of the land, contribution to the community, adaptation to changing conditions. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. We're expanding the program, Maya said eventually. The board approved it yesterday. We're looking at similar partnerships with struggling farming communities in 3 other states, applying what we've learned here. James raised his eyebrows. That's ambitious. It is. And we want you involved not just as a consultant, but as the director of the entire agricultural integration initiative. You would oversee all the regional projects, help us identify the right partners, ensure we maintain the balance between technology and traditional knowledge. She turned to face him directly. No one understands what we're trying to achieve better than you do, James. You've lived both sides of the equation. The offer took James by surprise. He had grown comfortable in his current role, focused on the former Harper farm and the surrounding community. The prospect of expanding his responsibility nationally, of helping to shape similar transformations in other struggling rural areas, was both daunting and compelling. I'd need to think about it, he said honestly. That's a big step. Of course, Maya agreed. Take your time. But I believe you're uniquely qualified for this role, and the impact you could have would be significant. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, James walked Beth back to his house, where she was staying during her visit. The night was clear, the stars brilliantly visible away from city lights. A sight James had always taken for granted, until his sister reminded him how rare it was in her urban life. So, Beth said as they walked, Director of Agricultural Integration for the entire company. That's quite an offer. James glanced at her. You heard? Maya mentioned it to me earlier. She wanted my opinion on whether you might be interested. And what did you tell her? Beth smiled. I said you would be terrified and tempted in equal measure, that you'd worry about leaving the farm. It's not my farm anymore, James interjected. It will always be your farm in some sense, Beth countered gently. But I also told her that you've discovered something this past year that might be even more fulfilling than farming itself, helping other farmers find sustainable paths forward in a changing world. James considered his sister's insight. She had always been perceptive about his motivations, sometimes understanding them better than he did himself. It would mean travel, he mused, being away from here, extended periods. Yes, but it would also mean extending what you've helped create here to other communities that need it just as badly. Imagine dozens of struggling towns like Millfield finding new purpose, dozens of family farms integrating new technology, rather than being swallowed by corporate operations. They reached the house, but remained outside, enjoying the night air and the distant view of the illuminated campus. Dad always said that the true test of a farmer wasn't how well they did in good years, but how they adapted to help their community through the bad ones, James said after a long moment. Maybe this is my way of doing that on a larger scale. Beth squeezed his arm affectionately. Sleep on it. But, for what it's worth, I think this might be exactly what you were meant to do. Later that night, after Beth had gone to bed, James sat on his porch with Rusty, contemplating the decision before him. The lights of the Nexus campus glowed in the distance, a physical reminder of how much had changed in a single year. He thought about the struggling farmer he had been, the day Maya Patel had stopped to ask for directions. He had been lost then too, though in a different way lost keen, in despair, in the feeling that everything he valued was slipping away despite his best efforts. He had been focusing so intently on preserving the past that he couldn't see the possibilities for the future. The irony wasn't lost on him. A tech CEO's wrong turn had ultimately helped him find a new direction. one that honored his heritage while embracing change. Now he had the opportunity to help others make that same journey. Rusty stirred beside him, the old dog looking up at his master with unwavering loyalty. James scratched behind his ears, smiling at the simple constancy that remained amid so much transformation. "What do you think, boy?" he asked softly. "Ready for some new adventures?" Rusty's tail thumped against the porch. Boards perhaps not a definitive answer, but close enough. Some things changed. Some remained the same. The wisdom was in knowing the difference and finding balance between them. As James gazed at the stars above and the transformed landscape below, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange, unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment. The lost traveler who had asked for directions that day had helped him find a path to see. He never knew existed one that didn't require abandoning his past, but rather carrying its essential truth forward in new ways. Tomorrow, he would tell Maya he was accepting her offer. The struggling farmer would become an agent of transformation for other farmers, other communities facing the challenges he had known so intimately. The legacy of the Harper farm would extend far beyond its boundaries, touching lives and lands he had never imagined. Sometimes, James reflected, the most important directions we give or receive have nothing to do with roads and maps. Sometimes they're about possibilities we couldn't see on our own, paths forward when we thought we had reached a dead end, new ways of honoring old values when the world changes around us. And sometimes, just sometimes, getting lost is the only way to find exactly where we're meant to be. 5 years later, the story of James Harper and Maya Patel had become something of a legend in both agricultural and technology circles. Millfield model, as it came to be known, had been replicated in 17 communities across the country, each adapting the core concept to their specific regional challenges and opportunities. Nexus Innovation campuses now operated in former farming regions of Iowa, Georgia, California, and Montana, among others, each maintaining the same principles that had made the original campus cry. Successful? Preserving working agricultural land, integrating local knowledge, ensuring community benefit, and developing technology that directly addressed real-world farming challenges. James had indeed accepted the position as National Director of Agricultural Integration, a role that had grown in scope and impact as the initiative expanded. He still maintained his home on the original campus, returning between his travels to other sites and serving as a mentor to the new regional directors who managed each location. The technology developed through this unique partnership had begun to shift the economics of small farming operations nationwide. Precision irrigation systems, soil health monitoring networks, and renewable energy solutions designed specifically for small to mid-sized farms were making sustainable agriculture viable even in regions affected by climate change and economic pressure. A new generation of farmers was emerging, equipped with both traditional agricultural knowledge and technological tools that their predecessors could only have dreamed of. Millfield itself had been transformed. The once struggling town now thrived as an unlikely hub of agricultural technology innovation. The community college had expanded into a specialized technical institute, drawing students from across the country interested in the intersection of farming and technology. Main Street bustled with activity, its historic buildings now housing everything from farm-to-table restaurants to software startups focused on agricultural applications. On a warm spring evening, James sat on the porch of his house, Rusty's successor, a young golden retriever named Harvest, lounging at his feet. Beth had come to visit, a more frequent occurrence now that she had transitioned to remote work and spent increasing amounts of time in Millfield. They watched the sunset over the campus, the experimental fields now in their spring planting phase. The site as beautiful as it had been when the land was solely the Harper family farm. "Did you see the feature in AgTech Monthly?" Beth asked, referring to a leading agricultural technology publication. "They called you and Maya the unlikely partnership that's reshaping rural America." James chuckled. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" "Not really," Beth countered. "Look around you. Look at what's happened here and what's happening at all the other campuses. It's a fundamentally different approach to the relationship between technology and agriculture, between urban and rural America. And it all started because a tech CEO got lost and a struggling farmer gave her directions." End quote. James smiled at the simplification, though there was truth in it. We were both lost in our own ways. Maya was losing touch with the real-world impact of her technology. I was losing my connection to the future of farming. Somehow, we found a path forward together. Beth studied her brother's face, noting the contentment there that had been absent for so many years. "Do you ever regret it? Selling the farm?" James considered the question seriously, as he had many times over the years. "No," he said finally. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, the drought, the economic pressures, all of that. But what came after? How could I regret that?" He gestured toward the campus, where the preserved farmhouse stood at the heart of the Agricultural Research Center, a living symbol of the bridge between past and future. The land is still being cared for. The community is thriving. The knowledge that Dad and Grandpa passed down is being combined with new innovations to help farmers everywhere. He smiled. "It's not what they would have imagined, but I think it honors what they valued most." As darkness fell and the campus lights began to twinkle in the distance, James reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought him to this point. The struggling farmer and the lost traveler had found something neither could have discovered alone, a new way forward that respected the past while embracing the future. That bridged technology and tradition, that transformed not just a farm or a company, but entire communities. Sometimes the most important directions we give are the ones that help others find their way to possibilities we ourselves hadn't imagined. And sometimes the most important directions we receive come from unexpected encounters that change not just our path, but our understanding of the journey itself. In the gentle evening breeze, with his sister beside him and the transformed landscape before him, James Harper felt the profound rightness of it all. The struggles and successes, the endings and beginnings, the losses and all. Discoveries. The farm had found its future, and so had he, all because he had taken the time to help a lost traveler find her way.